The ship that brought Kate Navarro to the academy was old, slow, and smelled like burned copper. She sat near the back, with her duffel bag on her lap and her notebook pressed against her chest. She had not slept in 2 days, not because she was scared, though she was, but because she kept drawing things in her notebook. Floor plans she imagined, tools she had seen in pictures, shapes she could not name yet. Her hand just kept moving. She was 19 years old, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she was about to become one of only 3 humans in the history of the Interstellar Academy of Craft and Discipline to be admitted as a student. The academy did not teach math. It did not teach war strategy or language or politics. It taught making. Building, shaping, cutting, forging, designing. The act of taking raw material and turning it into something that had a purpose. The people who ran the academy believed one thing above everything else. A species that could not make a tool worthy of survival had no business being out among the stars. That was not a motto printed on a wall. That was simply how they thought, in the same way that breathing was simply something they did. The academy itself floated in a slow orbit between 2 unremarkable moons. It had been there for over 400 years. The outer hull was dark and layered with old repair work, patches over patches, different materials welded together over centuries until the whole structure looked less like it was built and more like it had grown. Kate pressed her face against the small porthole as the ship came in close, and she stared at it for a long time without blinking. It looked, she thought, like something that had survived a great many things and was not especially bothered by any of them. 4 species maintained the academy together. The Vreth were tall, scaled in deep blue and indigo, with 4 arms, and a way of moving that made it seem like they were always doing several things at once. The Solani were lean and pale, almost translucent near the joints, and they communicated in long, careful sentences that left very little room for misunderstanding. The Tadri were shorter than expected, with wide, flat hands, and eyes that picked up frequencies of light that no other species could see. And the Dorn were large, very large, slow in speech, slow in movement, and known for making things that lasted longer than the civilizations that requested them. Humans were new. That was the word everyone used. Not primitive, not weak, not stupid, just new. Humanity had been in space for less than 80 years. Most of the species at the academy had been traveling between stars before humans had figured out how to build an iron bridge. This was not said to be cruel. It was simply true, the way it is true that a child who is 6 years old has not yet learned what a 40-year-old knows. The comparison did not make the child worthless. It just made them young. The problem was that some people, especially certain Vreth officials, felt that young was close enough to worthless that the distinction did not matter much. The Vreth ambassador to the Academy Council had filed a formal objection when Kate's application came through. The objection was polite, well-worded, and very clear. Humanity was geologically and culturally too young for admission. Allowing them in would lower the standard of the institution. The council had debated this for 3 days. In the end, they overruled the objection by a narrow vote, not because they were certain Kate would do well, but because they were curious. Curiosity, at the academy, was considered a reasonable basis for most decisions. Kate did not know any of this when she stepped off the ship. She knew she had been admitted. She knew it had not been easy. She did not know about the objection, or the vote, or the ambassador's carefully filed complaint. She just knew that she was here, and that her boots made a flat sound on the metal floor of the docking bay, and that the air tasted slightly different from Earth air. Thinner in some ways she could not describe, like the last breath before a yawn. A junior staff member, a young Solani with silver markings along her forearms, walked Kate to her dormitory without saying much. The corridors were wide and warm. The walls were not painted. They were bare alloy, scratched and marked from years of use, and Kate ran her fingertips along them as she walked. She was already mapping the place in her head. Left turn, long corridor, second right, low ceiling here, higher there. She had always done this, in new buildings, in unfamiliar streets, in airports. Her brother used to tease her about it and call her the family compass. She had never found it strange. It just seemed sensible to know where you were. Her dormitory room was small, but not uncomfortable. 2 beds, 2 desks, 1 large window looking out at the dark between the moons. Her roommate was already there when she arrived, a Solani student named Ivel, who looked up when Kate walked in and did not smile, but did not look unfriendly either. She looked the way a person looks when they have been told something they are not sure how to feel about. "You are the human," Ivel said. Kate said, and put out her hand. Ivel looked at the hand for a moment, then shook it carefully, like she was testing whether it would break. It did not. The first week passed without drama. Kate went to orientation. She attended 3 introductory sessions, and said very little. The Academy's atmospheric systems were calibrated for species that ran cooler, and Kate spent most of those early days slightly too warm, her face faintly flushed, drinking more water than anyone else in the room. She did not complain. She took notes. She drew diagrams. She memorized the schedule, the layout of the forge halls, the names of instructors whose classes she had not yet attended. Her main practical instructor was a Vreth craftsman named Dale. He had 4 arms, deep indigo scales, and he had been teaching at the academy for a very long time. Long enough that most of the tools in his personal workshop had been made by former students, now older than some governments. He acknowledged Kate on her first day in his class with a single measured look, and then moved on. Not dismissive, not welcoming. Simply noting that she was present, the way you note a new variable in a problem you have not yet solved. On the 7th day, a small notice arrived in every student's room. It was printed on plain paper, which surprised Kate. She had expected something digital. It said only this: in 2 weeks, the first major practical examination of the semester would take place. It was called the forging trial. That was all. No instructions. No materials list, no criteria. Every non-human student in the corridor outside seemed to read it and immediately know what it meant. Some looked eager, some looked nervous. Vron, a Kadri student with wide copper-colored eyes, who had barely acknowledged Kate all week, read the notice and stood a little straighter, like something had switched on inside him. Kate read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her notebook, and went to find someone who would explain it to her. She knocked on Evil's door that evening, notebook already open in her hand. "Tell me everything," she said. Evil looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside to let her in. Evil did not sit down right away. She stood near her desk and looked at Kate the way someone looks when they are deciding how much to say. Then she pulled out her chair, sat, and folded her hands on the desk in front of her. It was the posture of someone who was about to be careful with their words. She told Kate that the forging trial was the oldest test at the academy. It had been running since the first year the school opened, over 400 years ago, and in all that time, the rules had never changed. Each student was given a raw material, drawn at random from a sealed vault beneath the forge hall, and a single instruction: forge a blade worthy of your species. That was it. No further guidance. No rubric handed out in advance. Kate asked what worthy meant. Ivel thought about this for a moment. She said that the blade was not judged on how sharp it was, or how dangerous, or how well it would hold up in a fight. It was judged on craft, yes, but more than that. It was judged on what Instructor Dale called species truth. The idea that the way a people made something revealed who they really were, that the choices a maker made under pressure, when given only what they were given and nothing more, showed the character not just of the individual, but of the whole people they came from. Kate wrote this down. She underlined the words, species truth, twice. Ivel went on. She told Kate about the Vreth tradition. For centuries, Vreth students had brought a knowledge of volcanic glass, a material their ancestors had worked with before metal was even understood by their civilization. They folded it in layers under intense heat, and the result was a blade that held an edge longer than most alloys. It was not just a technique, it was a memory. Every Vreth student who had ever passed the forging trial had passed it because they understood that what they were making carried something older than themselves. The Solani method was different. Their blades were not cut, they were grown, through a chemical bonding process that required precise temperature management over several days. A Solani student could coax a crystal lattice to form along a specific geometric line, until the edge that emerged was not carved, but born. It required patience that most species found difficult to understand, and it produced blades that were less weapons than they were living structures, still slowly shifting at the molecular level, long after they were finished. The Kaedri worked with compressed stellar ore, dense, dark material recovered from dead star systems, and they shaped it using handheld tools that produced low-frequency vibrations only Kaedri ears could detect. The shaping was as much about listening as it was about cutting. A Kaedri blade, when it was done right, was said to hum faintly in a register just below what most other species could hear. Other students in the hall had reported feeling it more than hearing it, a low pressure behind the ears, like standing near something very large and very still. And the Dorn. Kate asked about the Dorn last, because the Dorn student in her class, a massive, quiet individual named Gorath, who moved slowly and never seemed to be in a hurry about anything, had been the one she understood least so far. Ivel told her that the Dorn bonded with their material biologically. They worked with a substance called living alloy, a metal that responded to organic contact over time, changing its structure in response to the specific chemistry of the individual handling it. A Dorn student would spend the entire trial with the material in constant contact with their hands, sleeping with it, warming it, and by the end the blade that emerged was unique to that individual in a way that no other species could replicate. The alloy would not respond the same way to any other hands. It was deeply personal in a way that was hard to explain in simple terms, and Kate sat quietly for a moment after Ivel described it, thinking about what that must feel like. Then she asked about the humans. Ivel was quiet for a beat longer than felt comfortable. She told Kate there had been 2 human students before her. The first had arrived 11 years ago, a young man from somewhere in the northern part of the continent called Canada. He had lasted 6 weeks at the academy before withdrawing. He had left before the forging trial, and no official reason had been recorded. Just a line in the register that said, "Departed by personal request." The second human student had attempted the trial. He had been given a material from the vault. Ivel did not know what it was, and on the second day of the trial, he had been discovered using a laser cutting tool he had smuggled into the forge hall inside a modified boot. The blade he produced was technically without flaw. The edge was perfect. The finish was clean. By any industrial standard, it was an excellent piece of work. Instructor Dale had looked at it for a long time. Then he had set it down and told the student that the blade was disqualified, not because of the tool, but because the student had decided in advance that what he was given was not enough, that the problem needed to be solved from outside rather than from within. Dale had said that a maker who did not trust the material had already failed before the work began. The student had argued. Dale had not responded. He had simply turned and walked out of the forge hall, and he had not spoken to that student again for the remaining weeks the student stayed at the academy. Kate listened to all of this without interrupting. When Ivel finished, she looked down at her notebook. She had been writing the whole time, and the page was dense with notes and small drawings. A crystal lattice, a rough shape for a volcanic glass fold, a question mark next to the words, living alloy. She asked Ivel one more question. She asked what happened to students who were given difficult materials, whether the vault was fair, whether the randomness of the draw was truly random, or whether in practice certain students tended to receive materials suited to them. Ivel considered this honestly. She said she believed the draw was genuinely random, but she also said that in her understanding, the materials in the vault were collected from across explored space, and some of them were more workable than others. She said it plainly and without apology, because it was simply true. Some draws were harder than others, and the trial did not adjust for that. Kate nodded slowly. She closed her notebook. She did not sleep well that night. Not because she was frightened, or at least not only because of that, but because she lay in the dark and thought about materials, about what she knew how to work with, about what her hands had experience with, about what her species had made, long before anyone had ever heard of an interstellar academy or a forging trial or a blade judged on species truth. She had taken a few craft classes back on Earth, a woodworking elective in her second year of school, a short course in leatherwork the summer she was 16. Nothing formal, nothing trained, just hands that had learned to pay attention to what they were touching. 2 weeks, she thought. She had 2 weeks. The morning the trial began, Kate was already awake before the lights came on. She dressed in the dark, picked up her duffel bag, and walked down to the forge hall. The other students filtered in behind her over the next half hour. The hall was large and warm, lined with individual stations, each one equipped with a forge unit, a set of general tools, and a clear workspace. At the front of each station sat a sealed box. Kate sat down at hers. She placed her notebook on the desk. She put both hands flat on the surface and breathed once, slowly. Then she reached forward and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of plain gray cloth, was a single length of bone. It was large, yellowed with age, slightly curved along its length, dense at one end, and tapering unevenly toward the other. It did not glow. It did not hum. It had no crystal structure, no magnetic alignment, no inner fire of any kind. It was old and plain and heavy, and it smelled faintly of the deep ocean. From 2 stations to her left, she heard Vron make a short sound. Not quite a laugh, something between surprise and disbelief. Kate did not look up. She reached into the box, picked up the bone with both hands and held it. She turned it over slowly. She ran her thumb along the grain of it, feeling where it was smooth and where it was rough, where it was dense and where it gave just slightly under pressure. Then she set it gently on the worktop, opened her notebook to a blank page, and picked up her pen. The first thing Kate did was nothing. She sat at her station with the bone in front of her, and she did not touch the forge unit. She did not open the tool cabinet. She did not look at what the other students were doing, though she could hear them, the low hum of Ron's frequency tools starting up 2 stations over, the soft hiss of evil beginning to prepare her chemical bath, the deep steady breathing of Gorath the Dorn as he pressed his large hands flat against his living alloy, and simply held it, warming it, beginning the long conversation between maker and material that his kind had practiced for generations. Kate just looked at the bone. She turned it slowly in her hands, the way she used to turn interesting rocks she found as a kid, back in New Mexico, when she would pick things up off the ground and carry them for miles before putting them back down. She pressed her thumb into the dense end. She held the thinner end up to the light and looked through it, which told her nothing useful, but felt like the right thing to do. She tapped it lightly with one finger and listened to the sound it made. It was dense, denser than she expected. Whatever creature this had come from, it had been built to carry serious weight. On the first morning, Instructor Dale walked the hall. He stopped at each station and observed. He did not comment. that was not his way during the trial. He simply watched, noted, and moved on. When he reached Kate's station, she was still sitting quietly with the bone in her lap and her notebook open, but empty. He looked at the bone. He looked at her. Then he looked at the blank page of her notebook, and something crossed his face that was not quite readable, but was not dismissive either. Then he moved on. Kate called after him before he got 2 steps away. She asked him 2 questions. She asked how dry the bone was, and she asked whether the Academy had a collection of Earth archaeological texts anywhere in its library. Dale stopped. He turned back and looked at her for a moment before answering. He told her the bone had been in the vault for approximately 60 years in a dry storage environment and was fully desiccated. No moisture remaining in the structure at all. For the second question, he said nothing. He looked at her for another second, then turned and continued down the hall. Kate went back to her notebook and started writing. That evening, when she returned to her room after dinner, there was a stack of old documents on her desk. Printed pages, translated texts, scans of physical records, archaeological surveys, prehistoric tool studies, a research compilation on early human material culture, going back over 100,000 years. No note attached. Just the documents, sitting there, like they had always been. She read until the lights in the corridor outside went dim, which the Academy used as a quiet signal for late hour. Then she kept reading by the small desk lamp. What she found in those pages settled something in her chest that had been uneasy since the moment she opened the sealed box. Bone was not a consolation prize. Bone was not what early humans used because they had no better option. Bone was the first serious tool material her species had ever mastered. It predated metal by tens of thousands of years. It predated smelting, forging, alloy work, all of it. Before the first iron blade, before the first bronze point, before any furnace was ever lit by human hands, there was bone. Shaped carefully, patiently, along its natural grain, into something with an edge sharp enough to change what a person can survive. They had worked with it because they understood it. Because they had learned, over generations, that the material itself had a shape already inside it, and the job of the maker was not to fight that shape, but to find it. Kate closed the documents, opened her notebook, and drew for a long time. The next 3 days in the forge hall were slow and quiet at her station, which stood out because nothing about the other stations was slow or quiet. Vron worked with focused intensity, his tools sending low vibrations through the floor that Kate could feel in the soles of her feet. Ivel's crystal blade was forming beautifully, catching light in ways that made other students glance over without meaning to. Gorath barely moved, but his material was changing. Anyone who looked closely could see it, the alloy darkening slightly at the contact points where his palms rested, responding to him in ways that had no technical explanation. She used no chemical bath, no frequency tool, no industrial press, no heat treatment of any kind. She took a grinding stone from the general materials cabinet, a plain flat one used for basic surface preparation, and a piece of rough woven textile she had brought in her duffel bag, which she had originally packed for cleaning her boots. She had a small bowl of water. That was the full list of what she worked with. She began at the thick end of the bone, finding the side that had the most natural taper when she held it at different angles. She worked slowly, grinding in short strokes, always following the direction of the grain rather than cutting across it. She got the angle wrong twice and spent time correcting it without frustration, just noting it and adjusting, the way she would correct a drawing that had gone slightly off. On the second day, Vron finished his blade. It was sharp and dark and precise, and he held it up, and the overhead lights caught it perfectly, and several students stopped what they were doing to look. It was a genuinely good piece of work, and Vron knew it, standing a little straighter as Dale examined it without comment. Kate kept grinding. On the third day, Ival's blade was complete. The crystal had formed into a long, clean shape, with an edge that looked less like it had been cut and more like it had always been there, just waiting to be uncovered. Ival held it, and for a moment she looked genuinely emotional about it, which Kate understood completely. Kate kept grinding. What she was building did not look like much from a distance. It did not catch the light. It did not hum or glow or pulse. It was a piece of bone being worked down by hand, slowly, on a flat stone, by a young woman who stopped every so often to hold it up, close one eye, check the line of the edge, and then go back to work. But up close, if anyone had looked, and a few people did, as the days passed, in the way that quiet things sometimes draw attention that loud things do not. What Kate was doing was precise. The edge she was working was not straight. It followed the natural curve of the bone, a long, gentle arc that suited the way the material lay. She was not forcing it into a shape. She was finding the shape that was already there. On the fourth evening, with one day remaining, she stopped grinding and picked up the rough textile. She worked the edge slowly, refining it, taking her time. She did not polish the full surface of the bone. She left the outer face rough, the original texture of the material, unchanged. Only the edge was worked smooth, and only the inner curve was cleaned to a dull shine. She held it in her hand in the low light of the forge hall after most of the other students had gone. It did not look like much. It looked like a piece of old bone that someone had sharpened. That was exactly what it was. She wrapped it carefully in the rough textile, placed it on her station, and walked back to her room. She did not tell anyone it was finished. She did not feel the need to. She slept well that night, for the first time since the trial began. The final morning of the trial came in quiet. Kate arrived at the forge hall before anyone else. She unwrapped the bone blade from its cloth, set it on her station, and sat in front of it, with her hands folded in her lap. The hall was still dark in the corners, the forge units cold and off, the tools resting in their cabinets. She looked at what she had made. It was not beautiful in the way that Ival's crystal blade was beautiful, or precise in the way that Vraan's dark stellar ore piece was precise. It was a curved length of worked bone, old and pale, one side rough and one side smooth, with an edge that followed the shape the material had always wanted to take. She did not feel proud of it yet. She just felt like it was done, and done honestly, and that was enough for now. The other students came in one by one. Blades were already placed on most of the stations, finished pieces resting on their cloths, waiting for the presentation. Gorath arrived last, moving slowly as always, his living alloy blade held in both hands, the way someone carries something that belongs to them in a way that goes past ownership. Instructor Dale entered the hall at exactly the scheduled hour. He was wearing his formal assessment coat, which was darker than his usual workshop clothes, and had 4 sleeves for his 4 arms, all buttoned to the cuff. He carried his ledger under his lower left arm. He stood at the front of the hall for a moment and looked at the room, and then he began. He went down the line of stations in order. He picked up each blade. He turned it. He examined the edge, the balance, the finish. He asked each student one question, and the question was always different, specific to what he saw in their work. With Vraan, he asked about the cooling sequence for the stellar ore. With a quiet Solani student named Pell, he asked why she had chosen the length she had chosen. With Gorath, he asked nothing at all, only held the living alloy blade for a moment, and then set it down with something that looked like respect. When he reached Kate's station, he stopped and looked at the bone blade without picking it up. He stood there for what felt like a long time. The hall was very quiet. A few students from nearby stations shifted slightly, watching without being obvious about it. Then Dale picked up the blade. He held it in his upper two hands, which he used for delicate work, and he turned it slowly, the way Kate had turned it on the first day of the trial. He ran one long finger along the rough outer surface. He looked at the edge from the side, close and careful. He pressed lightly with one finger near the tip, testing the density. Then he reached to his station table and picked up a small square of test paper, which he used in every assessment. Thin, dry, consistent. He held the paper vertical and drew the edge of the bone blade down across it in one slow movement. The paper separated without a sound. A few students heard it anyway, or rather felt the absence of sound where a sound should have been. Vron, standing 2 stations over, looked at the paper falling in 2 clean pieces and said nothing. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. Some small degree of certainty he had been carrying around, quietly rearranging itself. Dale set the paper down. He looked at Kate. He asked her why she had left one side of the bone rough and unworked. Kate had been waiting for a question, and this was still not the one she expected. She answered him plainly. She said that if a person was holding the blade in darkness, without being able to see it, they needed to know immediately, and without thinking, which side was the edge and which side was safe to grip. A smooth surface and a rough surface gave that information through touch alone, without sight, without light, without any other tool or condition being right. A blade that could only be used safely when everything was already going well was not a blade built for the moments that actually mattered. Dale looked at her for a moment after she finished. Then he wrote something in his ledger. He wrote for longer than he had written for any other student. He capped his pen and moved to the front of the hall. What happened next was not part of the standard assessment. Everyone in the hall seemed to understand this, because the energy in the room changed slightly, the way it changes when something unplanned begins. Dale asked the students to bring their blades and gather around the central stone table. It was a long, flat table in the middle of the forge hall, used for group demonstrations. The students arranged the blades on the table, side by side. 8 blades in a row, all different, all made from different materials and with different methods, and representing different traditions that went back, in some cases, thousands of years. Dale stood back and looked at them together. He began to speak. He spoke not about scores or technique, or which blade had the cleanest edge or the best finish. He spoke about what he called the story in the object. He pointed to Vron's stellar ore blade and talked about the Kadri, about a species that evolved in environments full of sound, that learned before anything else to listen before they acted, and how that was in the blade, in the way the shaping followed frequencies rather than force. He talked about the Solani and patience, about a people whose entire biology was built around slow, careful processes, and how Ivil's crystal blade was not made, but weighted into existence. He talked about the Dorn, last among the other species. He said that a people who bonded with their material made things that could not be copied, and that Gorath's blade would never be duplicated by any other hands in the universe, and that this was not a small thing. Then he picked up Kate's blade. He told the class that by every formal measure of material science, what he was holding was the least sophisticated object on the table. No crystal structure, no alloy content, no embedded frequency, no biological bond. It was bone, shaped by hand on a flat stone, with water and cloth. Then he asked the class what it did have. Nobody spoke for a moment. The hall was quiet enough that the low hum of the ventilation system was suddenly audible. It was Ivil who answered. She spoke carefully, choosing her words the way she always did, and she said that the blade had age in it. That the bone was already old when Kate received it, already carrying whatever life it had come from, whatever ocean it had come from, and Kate had not erased that or replaced it. She had worked with it. The roughness on the back was not laziness, it was the original surface of the thing, kept on purpose. The blade remembered what it was. Dale listened to this. He nodded slowly. Then he went to his personal cabinet at the side of the hall, which the students had never seen him open before, and he took out a sealed record. It was old. The cover was worn at the corners, and the material was not modern. He opened it and found a specific page and read one line from it aloud. The line had been written by one of the founding members of the Academy, a Vreth elder who had been dead for over 6 centuries. The line said that the truest measure of a maker was not what they could do with the finest material, but whether they could find what was already worthy in what they were given. He closed the record. He looked at Kate. He told her that her blade passed the trial. Then he paused, and he said something else. He said that in 300 years of running the forging trial, only a very small number of students had understood what the trial was actually testing. He said most of them were not recognized for it until long after they had left the academy. He said he preferred to recognize it now when it was in front of him. Kate did not say anything. She nodded once. Vron had been standing very still for the last few minutes. He was looking at the bone blade on the table with an expression that was not easy to name. Not embarrassment, not admiration exactly, but something close to the feeling of realizing that you had been standing next to something important without knowing it. Later that evening, after the hall had emptied and the blades had been returned to their makers, Vron found Kate in the east corridor near the library entrance. He stopped in front of her. He was quiet for a second, which was unusual for him because he was not generally a quiet person. Then he asked, with no pretense and no performance, if she would let him look at the Earth archaeological texts she had been reading. Kate looked at him. Then she reached into her duffel bag and took out her notebook. She held it out to him. Vron took it carefully with both hands. Nothing changed overnight. That was the first thing Kate noticed in the days after the trial. The academy did not stop moving. The corridors were still the same corridors. The forge hall still smelled the same way, metal and heat and something faintly chemical from the bonding baths. Classes resumed the morning after the assessment results were posted, and Instructor Dale walked in at exactly the scheduled hour and began talking about material stress testing as if the previous week had simply been a week and nothing more. But small things were different. And small things, Kate had learned a long time ago, were usually the ones worth paying attention to. The first small thing was that Dale called on her in class. Not to test her, the way he had in the early weeks, asking basic questions to see where her knowledge started and where it ran out. He called on her now to hear what she thought. There was a difference, and it was a clear one. When he asked the class about the relationship between material grain and edge durability, he asked 2 Solani students first, and then looked at Kate and waited. Not with the expression of someone expecting her to struggle, with the expression of someone who was genuinely curious what she would say. She said that grain direction was like a sentence. If you cut along it, the meaning held together. But if you cut across it, things broke apart in ways that were hard to predict. She said it because it was how she actually thought about it, not because she had read it anywhere. Dale wrote something in his ledger. He did that more often now when she spoke. The second small thing was Vron. He returned her notebook 2 days after the trial. He knocked on the dormitory room door in the evening, and held it out when she answered. And he said thank you, in a way that was direct and without decoration, which she had come to understand was just how Kadri expressed sincerity. No softening around the edges, just the plain thing itself. She took the notebook back. She noticed that he had tucked a folded piece of paper inside the front cover. On it he had written 3 questions about early human tool-making that he had not been able to find answers to in the notebook. And below the questions, he had written his dormitory room number. She answered the questions the next evening, in writing, and slipped the paper under his door. After that, They began to talk occasionally in the east corridor near the library, which was where their routes through the academy happened to cross in the late afternoon. The conversations were short at first. Vron asked questions, the way he did everything else, directly and with full attention. And Kate answered them the same way. And somewhere in that exchange, a thing that was not quite friendship, but was pointed in that direction, began to take shape. The third small thing was Owen Reyes. Kate had known he existed. She had been told when she arrived that there were 2 other human students at the academy. But Owen was in a different department, structural design, 3 floors up. And their paths had simply not crossed in the first weeks. He found her in the dining hall one morning, about a week after the trial results were posted. He was a year older than her, with the careful posture of someone who had spent a long time trying not to take up too much space in rooms where he felt out of place. He sat down across from her with his tray, and did not say anything for a moment. Then he said he had heard about the trial. He said the story had moved through the academy, the way stories do in a place where people pay close attention to things. Not loudly, not as gossip, but as information that mattered. He told her that the first thing any new human student heard at the academy, in some form or another, was a version of the same sentence. "You people are too young for this." He said he had heard it in his first week, said plainly by a Vreth senior student who had not meant it as cruelty, just as fact. He said he had been carrying it around ever since, not as anger, but as weight. He told her that what she had done in the trial made the weight a little lighter. Kate did not know what to say to that, so she said the only thing that felt true. She said she had not done it to prove anything to anyone. She had just looked at what she was given and tried to find what was already good in it. Owen looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like a person confirming something they had quietly believed for a while. They ate the rest of breakfast without talking much, which was comfortable rather than awkward. And after that, they sat together in the dining hall most mornings. There was one more thing that happened, though Kate did not learn about it until much later. A diplomatic message had been sent from the Vreth ambassador, who had originally objected to her admission. It was an internal communication, not meant for wide distribution, but these things had a way of moving. The message was addressed to the ambassador's senior aide, and it contained one line about the forging trial. The line said that the humans were more dangerous than previously calculated, not because of any capacity for violence, but because they remembered things. Things that other species had moved past, or set down, or quietly forgotten, and the humans had simply kept carrying. The message caused a small amount of diplomatic noise for about a week. Then it settled, the way these things do, into the background of ongoing interstellar relations, where it sat quietly, without resolving into anything specific. Kate never knew about the message. It would not have changed much if she had. She was not thinking about ambassadors or diplomatic calculations. She was thinking about her next project. 3 weeks after the trial, she was back at her station in the forge hall, on a quiet evening, working on a small utility tool. Nothing for a class, nothing for assessment. Just something she wanted to make. A small handle-shaped piece she had been turning over in her mind for a while, designed to give a better grip on the grinding stone she had used during the trial. A practical thing, a simple thing. Ivel came to find her. She appeared in the doorway of the forge hall, looked across the room, spotted Kate at her station, and walked over. She sat down on the empty stool on the other side of the workbench and watched Kate work for a moment, without speaking. This was something Ivel had gotten more comfortable with recently, sitting in quiet near another person, without feeling the need to fill the space with words. It had not come naturally to her at first. It was something she had picked up, slowly, from spending time near Kate. After a while, she asked what Kate was making. Kate told her. She held up the rough shape of the handle so Ivel could see it, turned it once, and set it back on the worktop. Ivel looked at it. Then she reached out and picked up a small scrap piece of stone that was sitting at the edge of the materials tray. It was not much, a flat, irregular chunk left over from someone else's project. She turned it over in her fingers. She asked Kate how she knew where to start. When a material had no clear shape yet, and no instructions, and no tradition behind it telling her what it was supposed to become, how did she know where to put her hands first? Kate thought about this for a moment. It was not a question she had been asked before in those exact words, but it was one she had been answering, in practice, her whole life. She said that she did not start with what she wanted the thing to become. She started by paying attention to what the material already was. The weight of it, the grain of it, the way it sat in the hand. She said that if you listened to the material long enough, it usually told you something about the shape it could hold without breaking. And once you knew that, the rest was just patience and work. Ivel turned the scrap piece of stone over one more time. Then she set it on the bench in front of her and looked at Kate. She asked if she would show her. Kate slid over on the bench to make room. She set down her own work. She picked up the flat grinding stone and placed it between them on the worktop, and she positioned the lamp so the light fell across the surface of the stone at a low angle. The way her hands had taught her was best for seeing the grain clearly. Outside the forge hall windows, the two moons moved in their slow old orbit, indifferent and steady, the way they had been moving for a very long time, before any of the species now sitting under their light had ever thought to look up. Inside, two young women from different worlds sat close together at a workbench, and began.